I helped build this company with my father. I lived for it. I trusted him more than anyone. Then came two words, delivered without emotion: "You're fired." To him, it was just another business decision. To me, everything fell apart. He added, "It's nothing personal. Ethan and Connor are the future of this company. I'm sorry, Mia. This is what's best for everyone." On the table, termination papers, and a sticky note. Sign. In a single moment, I lost both my job and my family. But 2 years later, when everything had changed, they came asking me for help. And my words caught them completely off guard. What happened next changed them forever. I saw it in their eyes: shock, fear, and regret that came far too late. My name's Lena Whitaker. I'm 31, and I used to be the VP of Operations at Whitaker Sons Build Co. I was halfway through my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my dad. His voice was calm, final. "You're out of the family business, Lena. Don't call back." Just like that, 7 years of 70-hour work weeks, millions in contracts, and everything I thought defined me, gone in under a minute. My hands started to shake, but I kept a straight face. Around me, the cafe hummed with quiet chatter, completely unaware. I set my phone down, took a deep breath, and typed one word back: understood. If you're watching this, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear how this all unfolded, from being pushed out to rebuilding. Whitaker Sons Build Co. wasn't just a company to me. It was my legacy, my dream, my roots. I grew up in Crescent Hill, Montana, surrounded by sawdust and blueprints. Construction was part of my world from the time I could walk. My dad, David Whitaker, launched the business 38 years ago with nothing but a toolbox, a pickup truck, and grit that didn't quit. Mom used to joke that he had concrete in his veins instead of blood. Some of my earliest memories are of him lifting me onto his shoulders at job sites, showing me how framing and foundation came together. "It all starts here, Lena," he'd say. "Everything needs a solid base." By the time I turned 11, I could read blueprints. At 13, I was helping with the books during summer breaks. This business wasn't just in my life, it was in my DNA. So when college applications came around, there was never really a question. I went to the University of Montana, double majored in business administration and sustainable building design. I graduated summa cum laude, gave the student commencement speech, and had job offers lined up from 3 national construction firms before I even tossed my graduation cap. My dad acted surprised when I told him I was turning them all down to join the family business. But I saw the pride in his eyes, plain as day. "You sure, Lena? Those are some great offers," he asked. We both knew I was. I started out in project management, making sure no one could accuse me of taking shortcuts because of my last name. I arrived before sunrise and didn't leave until the site lights dimmed. The crews respected me not because I was David Whitaker's daughter, but because I pulled my weight, and then some. I never asked anyone to do something I wasn't willing to do myself. When I flagged issues in our supply chain that were quietly draining thousands of dollars, Dad bumped me up to operations manager. By 28, I was vice president. Under my leadership, we'd grown beyond residential homes and into commercial developments across 3 states. Our revenue had doubled since I came on full-time. Between streamlining our systems and championing sustainable construction, we were becoming known as innovators in the Mountain West. Our family dynamic, though, was more complicated. My mom, Elaine Whitaker, always had my back but preferred to stay behind the scenes. She kept the household running while Dad built his company and rarely offered thoughts on business decisions. She was definitely proud of me. But I also sensed she worried about how much of myself I poured into the job. Then there was my brother, Caleb. He's 5 years older than me, but for some reason, always seemed like he was still trying to find his footing. He had the Whitaker name and Dad's jawline, but not much of his work ethic. Caleb worked in sales. He had charm, sure, and he could win people over, but he didn't follow through. I'd often be left untangling the consequences, projects overpromised, timelines misrepresented, quotes given without consulting engineering. Still, Dad had a soft spot for him. "He'll figure it out," he'd say. "Not everyone takes off running the way you did, Lena." Even with Caleb's flaws, Dad always said the future was ours, mine and Caleb's. Equal partners in the legacy. A Whitaker legacy. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I shaped my whole life around that promise, working relentlessly to make sure the business not only survived but soared. Just last year, we began construction on our biggest project yet, a mixed-use development in downtown Crescent Hill. My concept. My blueprint. Apartments above storefronts, built with locally sourced materials. Solar panels, rainwater systems, shared green spaces. It was designed for the future, eco-conscious, community-focused, modern. We called it Whitaker Riverbend Place. This was going to be our crown jewel. At the groundbreaking, Dad handed me the ceremonial golden shovel. "This one's yours, Lena," he announced to everyone. The future of Whitaker construction. I remember how that shovel felt in my hands. Heavy but right. Like a symbol of everything I'd worked for. Later that night at dinner, Dad raised his glass. "To Lena," he said, "who doesn't just see what buildings are but what they could become." Everyone clapped. Even Caleb managed a smile, though something in his eyes didn't match it. Back then I had no clue that just 6 months later, I'd be standing in a coffee shop, staring at a voicemail that erased it all. The foundation I trusted turned out to have cracks I never noticed, ones that were about to give way. Looking back now, I can see when the shift began, even though it felt subtle at the time. It started about 3 months before that voicemail. I put together a detailed presentation at our quarterly strategy meeting, proposing that we expand our use of eco-friendly materials across every project. The data supported it. Our green builds were bringing in premium prices and generating great media coverage. But just as I pulled up my slides, Dad glanced at his watch and cut me off. "Let's hold off on this for now, Lena. We've got more pressing things to cover." He didn't say what those things were and never followed up. Later that week, I noticed Dad and Caleb grabbing lunch together. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, at first. But suddenly, those lunches became a daily routine. Every time I approached their table, the conversation would stop. Dad would wave me off and say it was just father-son catch-up. Then came Douglas Klein. He was Dad's old college roommate and a semi-retired exec from a national construction firm. Out of nowhere, Dad brought him on as a strategic consultant. He didn't loop me in beforehand, not even a heads up. When I asked about it, Dad just said, "Douglas has been in the industry for 40 years. He's here to help us navigate this next growth phase." Douglas Klein had silver hair, a tall frame, and a kind of rehearsed friendliness. He laughed at his own jokes more than anyone else did. Almost instantly, he made himself comfortable in our offices. He dug through contracts, reviewed internal workflows, and started asking pointed questions about how we managed our clients. When I asked to see his reports, Dad brushed me off. "They're still in progress." That's when the changes started creeping in. A sustainable materials vendor I'd vetted and approved suddenly dropped. A project manager I'd handpicked reassigned. The marketing campaign I'd developed for our Riverbend Place project shelved without a real explanation. Every time I asked why, I got vague replies. "We're still evaluating. It's just a matter of timing. We'll revisit that later." Then came the moment that stopped me cold. One Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the conference room and found my dad, Caleb, Douglas, and 2 of our board members deep in discussion about a meeting I didn't even know was happening. Blueprints were spread across the table. They were redesigns of the Riverbend Place project, my project, and most of the sustainability features had been stripped out. "What's going on here?" I asked, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. Dad looked up, clearly caught off guard. "Just running through a few value engineering options," he said casually. "Nothing final." Value engineering? They were cutting the solar panels. The rainwater harvesting system. These were key components. The city had approved our permits based on those very features. Douglas Klein cleared his throat. "Well, the initial projections might have been a bit too optimistic about returns. We're just adjusting to the market reality." I pushed back. "I crunched those numbers myself, they hold up. And we've already placed the orders." Dad stood up. "Lena, let's not get into this now. Douglas brings valuable insights. Let's give them a chance." I could feel the air tightening around me. These weren't small edits, they were unraveling the entire vision I built. And somehow I was no longer part of the conversation. Later that evening, my assistant Natalie quietly pulled me aside. We stepped out to a nearby park so we wouldn't be overheard. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said, glancing around nervously. "But your dad, Caleb, and Mr. Klein have been meeting almost every day when you're out visiting sites." Then came the kicker. Mr. Klein's son Logan has come in twice for interviews. Interviews? For what role? Natalie hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. They didn't say. But they were showing him around like he was already part of the team, including your office. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe they were expanding leadership for the new growth phase. But why all the secrecy? Why keep me out? That weekend, I went to my parents' house for our monthly family dinner. Mom seemed distant, distracted. She kept checking her phone. When Dad stepped out to take a call, she leaned in close. "Lena, be careful," she whispered. "What do you mean, Mom?" She looked uneasy. "Just watch your back. Your father's not thinking clearly these days." Before I could ask anything else, Dad walked back in. Mom immediately changed the subject to her garden club. I tried to talk to her alone later that night, but she avoided being alone with me. When I left, she hugged me tighter than usual. Like it wasn't just a goodbye but a quiet warning. Then the next blow landed. The following week, I found out I'd been left off the guest list for a business dinner with one of our most important potential clients. When I asked Dad about it, he shrugged it off. It was just an informal meal, not a big deal. But later, I found out they had signed a preliminary deal for a high-end condo project. Exactly the type of development I'd advised against because the market was already oversaturated. Any one of these moments could have seemed like a fluke. Together, they painted a very different picture. Something was shifting at Whitaker Sons Buildco, and whatever it was, I wasn't part of it anymore. Still, despite all the signs, I never expected how fast everything would unravel. March 12th started out like any other Tuesday. Typical spring weather in Crescent Hill. Light rain in the morning, but by midday, the sun started peeking through the clouds. I was heading to a new job site for a meeting with car developers. They were considering us for a major commercial build, and it aligned perfectly with our sustainable design mission. I'd spent the week preparing proposals, crunching the numbers and perfecting our pitch. This was the kind of project that could take our firm to the next level. A full office campus built to top-tier environmental standards, LEED Platinum. The meeting went better than I could have hoped. Anthony Carr, the CEO, shook my hand and smiled. "Your passion for sustainable design is exactly what we're after, Lena. I think Whitaker is the right fit." I was buzzing. I called the office right after to share the good news, but Dad didn't answer. I left a voicemail full of excitement. Then I decided to treat myself to something small. A coffee before heading back. I'd earned it. That deal could bring in millions in revenue and dozens of new jobs. The cafe was packed with the late morning crowd. I ordered my go-to large latte extra shot, and found a seat by the window. Raindrops started tapping against the glass again. I pulled out my tablet to check a few emails while I waited for my drink. Just then my phone buzzed. Dad's name lit up the screen. Perfect timing, I thought. I couldn't wait to share the big news about Carr. But the call didn't connect. Instead, it went straight to voicemail. That was odd. I picked up my phone to call him back. But just as I did, a new voicemail notification popped up. Still smiling from the high of the meeting, I hit play and held the phone to my ear. "Lena." Dad's voice came through, flat and professional. No greeting, no warmth. "The board met this morning. We've decided to restructure company leadership, effective immediately. You're no longer part of Whitaker Sons Buildco. Your access has been revoked, and your position has been filled. Do not come to the office. Don't call back. Your personal belongings will be sent to your apartment. This decision is final." The message ended. No explanation. No goodbye. Just the robotic voice asking if I wanted to save or delete it. I didn't move. I sat there frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Somewhere in the background, I heard the barista call my name, but it sounded distant, like it was underwater. Slowly, I lowered my phone and stared at the screen, hoping for some kind of mistake or hidden detail that would make it make sense. My mind spun. Was this real? Had his phone been hacked? Was it some kind of horrible prank? But I knew that voice. That measured, formal tone my dad used only when there was no room for discussion. It was real. All of it. I felt a strange ache in my chest, like something inside me had clenched tight. My breathing turned shallow. Around me, life carried on. Laptops clicking, espresso machines steaming, people chatting as if the world hadn't just cracked open in mine. The barista called my name again, louder this time. I stood slowly, legs unsteady, and walked over to grab my drink. I thanked her automatically. Back at the table, I placed the untouched latte down and just stared at my phone. What do you even say in a moment like that? How do you respond to being erased, your career, your plans, your identity, stripped away in a 15-second voicemail? I could have called back and demanded an explanation. I could have driven straight to the office, made a scene. I could have broken down, raised my voice, tried to change his mind. But instead, I opened my messaging app, typed a single word, and hit send. Understood. Then I picked up my things, left the coffee behind, and walked out into the rain. I drove for hours, not really headed anywhere, just moving. My route took me past buildings I'd helped bring to life. The Miller offices with their striking curved facade. The updated Parkside apartments that had won us a regional design award. The elementary school we rebuilt after a fire, finished ahead of schedule so the students could return to something familiar. Each one was a reflection of my dedication. A piece of my story. Now they stood as silent reminders of everything I'd just lost. Eventually, I ended up parked outside my apartment. It was a renovated warehouse with brick walls and tall windows. I'd chosen it because it was just 15 minutes from the office. But what did that matter anymore? Inside, everything felt unfamiliar. Photos from family events sat on the bookshelf. The model of our first commercial project, Dad gave it to me the day we landed the contract. My hard hat, printed with Whitaker, the one I'd worn on hundreds of job sites. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky had darkened over Crescent Hill, city lights flickering on one by one. People were out there, finishing their Tuesday like any other. Meanwhile, my world had quietly come undone. My phone stayed silent. No call from my mom. No messages from coworkers. No questions. No support. Just that one voicemail. And my one-word reply sitting quietly in the digital space between me and the man who sent it. Not, why? Not, how could you? Not, please let's talk. Just understood. Because in that moment, when everything felt like it had slipped out of my control, silence was the only power I had left. I wouldn't give him my hurt. Or my anger. Or my tears. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking up, checking my phone, half hoping it had all been a terrible dream. But the morning came. And nothing had changed. No second call. No explanation. I was out. Just like that. No meeting. No discussion. Just severed, like I'd been edited out of the family's future with the press of a button. The days after that voicemail blurred together. The next morning I reached for my phone on instinct, ready to dive into my usual work emails. Then the reality hit me all over again. Still, part of me couldn't help it. I opened the company login page. Access denied. I tried to pay for a coffee later that day, company card declined. Tried to swipe my key card at the office, nothing. It was like I'd never existed there. But my phone didn't stay quiet. It buzzed nonstop with texts and calls from confused clients and coworkers. Anthony Carr, the same CEO I'd met with the day before. Lena, I'm hearing strange things. Can you call me? Longtime suppliers, is it true you're no longer with Whitaker? Project managers, we've got pending approvals, what's the plan? I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that you were let go by voicemail and never told why? That after years of giving everything, you were just removed? By day 3, I still hadn't heard a single word from my family. I finally called Mom. Straight to voicemail. I tried the house phone. No answer. Even reached out to Caleb, nothing. It felt like I had disappeared, and nobody even noticed. By the 5th day, I was desperate to understand what had happened. I texted Natalie and asked if she could meet me somewhere, anywhere that wasn't near the office. We settled on a diner across town, out of the way and quiet. When she arrived, she looked tense, eyes darting over her shoulder as she slid into the booth. I'm not really supposed to be talking to you, she said right away. They made us all sign NDAs about the transition. Natalie, I said gently, please. I need to know what's going on. She picked at the edge of her napkin, clearly nervous. It all happened so fast. Monday afternoon, right after you left for the car meeting, they called an all-hands meeting. She paused, then continued, your dad stood up and said the company was going back to its roots, focusing on luxury residential development. Then came the part that made everything click. He introduced Logan Klein as the new VP of Operations. Douglas Klein's son. Everything started falling into place. Apparently, she added, he's been shadowing different departments for weeks. And then your dad said you'd chosen to pursue new opportunities, and that all communication should now go through Caleb or Logan. My mouth fell open. That's not true. I didn't leave. I was removed by voicemail, right after the biggest meeting of my career. Natalie winced. I know. And there's more, Lena. They're undoing everything you worked for. The sustainability programs. The community outreach. Even the diverse hiring practices you implemented, they're all being phased out. It hit me like a punch to the gut. But those initiatives were profitable. They set us apart in the market. Douglas convinced your dad that luxury is where the fast money is. Fewer regulations, bigger returns. She hesitated, her voice quieter now. And there's something else. I overheard him talking about treatment options. I think your dad's dealing with some kind of health issue. I blinked. He's sick? Why didn't he tell me? I don't know the details, she admitted. But he's been having private conversations, medical stuff, very hush-hush. As Natalie kept talking, the full picture began to form. Douglas Klein hadn't just stepped in to offer advice. He'd orchestrated a complete power shift. Logan was being set up as my replacement. Caleb, who'd always struggled to match my performance, had aligned with them. Together, they'd convinced my father that the company needed a new direction. Gone was the mission I built. One centered around smart growth, sustainable design, and long-term community benefit. In its place, a fast track to profit through luxury builds. There's one more thing, Natalie said softly. When I went in yesterday, your office was completely cleared out. They had a courier bring boxes to your apartment. Did you get them? I hadn't. But when I got home, I asked the doorman, and sure enough, 4 large boxes had been delivered that morning. One by one, I carried them upstairs, feeling like I was holding pieces of something no longer alive. Inside were the remnants of my professional life, photos from company events, industry plaques, my diplomas removed from the wall, the little plant I'd managed to keep alive for 5 years, its soil spilled everywhere, even client thank you notes tossed in with cracked frames. At the bottom of the last box was a folder legal paperwork, a standard exit agreement in exchange for a few months of pay, offering 5 months of severance against Whitaker Sons Buildco. A simple sticky note in his writing said, "Let me know once you've signed. Sign in return for payment." I let the papers slip through my fingers. That night, I began piecing together what had really happened. I reached out to an old classmate who worked for one of our competitors. "Have you heard anything about Whitaker Construction lately?" "Actually, yeah," she said. "Word is they're shifting hard into luxury. And there are whispers of financial strain. Something about securing outside funding. Oh, and someone mentioned your dad's been considering selling a controlling share." Selling? That was news to me. The books had looked solid when I reviewed them just a few weeks earlier. I started building a timeline, tracing back from the voicemail to Douglas Klein's arrival, to the closed-door meetings, to Logan being brought in. It hadn't been sudden at all. This was a carefully planned takeover, happening right under my nose while I was working day and night to grow the business. But the worst part came when I checked my personal email. I found messages from clients, confused, frustrated, asking about recent changes I'd supposedly approved. Contract terms had been altered, promises walked back, and my name was being used as the reason for those changes. They hadn't just removed me. They'd used my reputation to justify tearing down everything I'd built. I contacted Vanessa Liu, an attorney who specialized in family business matters. After reviewing my case, she gave me a tough reality check. "When you joined the company," she asked, "did you sign any employment agreements, shareholder paperwork, operational documents?" I nodded. Of course I had, just the standard stuff. She pointed to a few clauses and said gently, "These documents give full control to the board. And in this case, your father is the board. You don't have a guaranteed role even though you're family. And because of the non-compete clause, you're blocked from working with any Whitaker clients for 2 years. There must be something wrongful termination? Defamation?" "Lena," she said gently, "family businesses operate in gray areas. They relied on your trust. And unfortunately, you gave it. Legally, their position is solid. Your options are limited." I left her office feeling crushed that I hadn't just lost my job. I'd lost my family at the same time. And somehow, I'd signed away my right to even push back. 2 weeks after the voicemail, I hit my limit and no word from anyone in my family. Meanwhile, I was hearing rumors in the industry about why I'd left. Clients I'd spent years building relationships with suddenly wouldn't respond. I realized I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to face this. So I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday evening, our usual family dinner night for as long as I could remember. As I pulled up, I saw their cars. My dad's Range Rover, my mom's Volvo, Caleb's Audi, and 2 others I didn't recognize, one probably Douglas Klein's. They were sitting down to family Dinner without me. I parked across the street and sat quietly, watching the house through the dining room windows. There they were, gathered around the table, Mom passing dishes, Dad at the head like always. Caleb was talking with his hands, clearly in the middle of some story, and sitting there were the Kleins, Douglas, and a younger guy who had to be Logan. They were laughing, eating, acting like I'd never even existed. I almost got out. I almost walked right up and knocked. I wanted answers, but I didn't. Something in me stilled. Watching them like that, I felt a strange calm. They'd made their choice. Making a scene wouldn't undo it. I started the car and drove off, more certain with every smile I saw through the glass. The next day, my mother sent a text. Coffee tomorrow? Just us. We met at a quiet cafe, far from both the Whitaker office and their house. She looked tired, older somehow. When she hugged me, she held on longer than usual. I'm so sorry, Lena, she said as we sat down. This isn't what I wanted. Then why is it happening? I asked. Why didn't you warn me? She hesitated. Your father's not well. The doctors found serious blockages. He needs surgery. Recovery will be long. He started panicking about the company's future, and that led to you being cut out. That doesn't make sense, I said. She looked away. Douglas convinced him you were planning a takeover. That you'd use his illness as a chance to push Caleb out. That's ridiculous. I never. Douglas had proof, Lena. Emails, meeting notes, client conversations. All suggesting a change in leadership once your father stepped down. I was stunned. Those were succession talks. Dad asked me to start preparing for a transition in the next 5 years. He painted it differently. And Caleb, she trailed off. He helped them, didn't he? I said. He's always resented that Dad trusted me with operations. She didn't deny it. Douglas offered a plan. His son Logan would fill in while your dad recovers. Caleb would manage client relations. Douglas called it a return to family values. And me? I asked. Aren't I family? Your father thinks you've changed, Lena. All the sustainability efforts, the community focus. He says it's not what Whitaker Construction was built for. Douglas made him believe you were turning the company into something he wouldn't recognize. Each word hit harder than the last. My own ideas, meant to grow the company, have been twisted into reasons to cut me out. And instead of speaking to me, he believed all of it. Why a voicemail, Mom? After everything I've done for him, for the company, why couldn't he say it to my face? She looked down. He was afraid you'd change his mind. You've always been persuasive, Lena. He couldn't face that. As we talked more, it became clear. Caleb had been framing things in a way that cast doubt on my work and reports. Douglas presented a version of events that didn't reflect what really happened, that I was planning to leave and take clients with me. Then he showed my dad an email, one that supposedly proved I wanted to move clients away from Whitaker. That was the final blow. That email wasn't written by me, I said. I never sent anything like that. I believe you, she said softly. But your father either doesn't or doesn't want to. He's scared, Lena. Facing your own health like that, it changes people. We hugged before parting. I'll try to talk to him, she said. When he's stronger after the surgery. But we both knew it was already too late. The damage had been done. In the weeks that followed, the full picture came into view. A few former coworkers reached out, quietly, carefully. They told me Caleb and Logan were actively reshaping the narrative. I was being painted as unreliable. They said I'd mismanaged key projects, made unrealistic promises, strained important partnerships. My name was gone from the website. The projects I'd led were now credited to the Whitaker team. The sustainability programs I championed? Now being sold as Caleb's vision, even though they were already being scaled back. And then the financial hits started to land. My savings were decent, but most of my bonuses had been reinvested into company stock. Stock I now couldn't sell because of transfer limits. The severance agreement was still sitting on my counter and signed, because signing it would mean agreeing with their version of the story. But pride alone couldn't cover my mortgage. Contacts who once seemed excited to collaborate now wouldn't even return my calls. The non-compete clause blocked me from reaching out to any Whitaker clients. My entire career had been wrapped so tightly around the family business that, without it, I felt like I had vanished. One evening I drove past the Riverbend Place site. The sign had been replaced. No more sustainable urban living. Now it read, luxury condominiums from the $900s. Everything I'd envisioned gone. I pulled over and stared at the dark, empty site. I felt emotion welling up as I looked at what remained. That was the moment it really sank in. They were moving the company in a direction that erased my contributions bit by bit, piece by piece. Not just my job, but the legacy I had tried to create. That night, I signed the severance papers. Not because I agreed with how they'd framed the situation, but because I needed the means to survive at least long enough to begin again. I mailed it the next morning, and it felt like I was signing away my entire professional life. When the severance check arrived, I couldn't bring myself to cash it. For days, it just sat there. It felt wrong, as if accepting it meant agreeing to be erased. But eventually, the practical reality took over. The money would buy me time, and right now, that was the one thing I needed most. Time to recover. Time to think. Time to rebuild from the ashes of what had been lost. By the third month after that voicemail, I'd hit rock bottom. I'd left my spacious apartment and moved into a small studio in a cheaper neighborhood to stretch my savings. The severance was disappearing more quickly than I expected. Job interviews in construction kept falling apart. Every lead started strong, then quietly disappeared. The Whitaker name, once a strength, had become something that quietly worked against me. One rainy night, which in Crescent Hill isn't exactly rare, I sat on the floor of my new apartment, half-unpacked boxes scattered around me. That night, I sat with a glass of wine, trying to make sense of everything, scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Snapshots of past projects, office celebrations, team wins, even family gatherings at work. Everything I had built, reduced to memories and cardboard. I stopped at one photo. It was from the Riverbend Place groundbreaking. My dad had his arm around me, both of us in hard hats, holding those gold-painted shovels. His smile looked real. But I couldn't stop wondering, had he already made his decision back then? Had any of it been genuine? In that low moment, I almost gave up completely. I seriously considered leaving Crescent Hill. Starting over somewhere far away, where the Whitaker name wouldn't follow me. Maybe I could teach construction management at a small college. Or shift into real estate. Or leave the industry entirely. Then my phone rang, breaking the silence. An unknown number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. But some part of me still held out hope, so I answered. Lena Whitaker? My own voice sounded empty even to me. Lena, it's Rachel Monroe. Rachel Monroe, owner of Monroe Community Developments. We'd worked together on a joint project 2 years ago, a mixed-income housing development that had won awards for its creative, budget-conscious design. Rachel, I said, surprised. This is unexpected. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your email bounces back and your phone just goes to voicemail. I hadn't been checking messages. Too many awkward conversations to face. Sorry about that, I've been in transition. She paused. Yeah, I heard. News travels fast in this business. Then she said, look, I don't know exactly what happened with Whitaker, and honestly, I don't need to. What I do know is this: when we worked together, you were one of the most capable and creative project managers I've ever met. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of the confidence I used to have. Thank you, I said. That really means a lot right now. It's not just a compliment, Lena, I actually have an opportunity for you. Her firm had just been awarded a contract to build a small community center in Crescent Hill. Tight budget, difficult location, high sustainability standards. And you were the first person I thought of, she said. Rachel, I'm honored, I told her. But I can't. The non-compete. I had my legal team look into it, she said quickly. This doesn't conflict with it. The client isn't connected to Whitaker at all. Different market, and you be consulting, not working for a competing firm. We can structure it carefully. The idea of building something again, something that mattered, was so tempting. But fear held me back. I'm not sure I'm ready, I admitted. I understand. Take your time. We start early design work in 2 weeks, so just think it over. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. It was a door, maybe the only one that wasn't shut in my face. But I had to decide whether I was brave enough to walk through it. The next day brought another surprise. An email from Frank Delaney, my father's original business partner. He'd retired and sold his share of the company over 15 years ago. He'd heard about what happened and wanted to meet. We sat down at his house, a modest place with a woodshop out back, where he still made furniture by hand. Even at 75, Frank was sharp, blunt, and focused. Your father's making the same mistake with you that he made with me, he said, barely waiting until we sat down. He pushes out the very people who could move the company forward because he's afraid of what change means. Then he shared stories I'd never heard. About how he and my dad had clashed over expansion plans. How my father had slowly diluted his ownership until selling made more sense than fighting. and how their 40-year friendship ended not over personal issues but over how to lead the company. Your dad builds beautiful structures, Lena. But just like he constructs buildings, my father tears down relationships with precision. He can't tolerate anyone questioning his vision, even when that vision is outdated. As we talked, Frank shared something unexpected. Throughout his career, including his partnership with my father, he had kept detailed journals. He walked back to his workshop and returned with a box of leather-bound notebooks. You might find some clarity in these, he said. Family businesses have a way of repeating themselves. That night, I began reading them. The journals chronicled the early days of Whitaker Construction, then called Delaney and Whitaker Builders. What stood out most was how familiar it all felt. Frank had documented how my grandfather, Thomas Whitaker, pushed his own brother out of their earlier construction company 30 years ago. Using eerily similar tactics, isolation, distrust, and accusations of disloyalty. It wasn't just a one-time story. It was a pattern. The Whitaker men built businesses and burned bridges with equal dedication. But reading those journals gave me something I hadn't expected: perspective. For the first time, I could see that this wasn't just my failure. It was a generational cycle I'd been caught in. My father wasn't simply turning against me. He was reenacting behavior he'd learned from his own father. Understanding that didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me stop seeing it as something I had caused. This wasn't about my competence or my decisions. It was about fear. Fear of change. Fear of letting go of control. Fear of what the future might bring. Fears that had everything to do with the Whitaker legacy and nothing to do with me. The next morning, I called Rachel Monroe and accepted her consulting offer. Then I sat down at my small kitchen table with a blank notebook and started sketching out a business plan. Not for a construction firm, my non-compete still made that off limits, but for a consultancy focused on sustainable building practices. I named it Summit Arc Consulting. The goal: provide expert guidance on energy-efficient design, eco-friendly materials, and sustainable construction methods. My target clients? Smaller firms that didn't have full sustainability departments, but wanted to compete in a market that was rapidly becoming more environmentally conscious. Firms like Rachel's. Starting over was scary. I had no clients other than her, limited savings, and a reputation that had been quietly torn apart. But I did have experience. I had knowledge. And for the first time, I had a reason to build something for myself. The next day, I registered the business name. The day after that, I put together a simple website. Then I ordered business cards that read, Lena Whitaker, founder and principal consultant. Clean. Professional. Clear. With each of those small steps, I started to piece together my confidence again. Rachel's community center project became my lifeline. I poured everything into it. Researching creative materials that could meet strict sustainability goals without breaking the budget. I designed alternatives to pricey systems by using smart, passive elements. I worked harder than I ever had at Whitaker because I knew this project could make or break my new beginning. When we presented our design to the community board, their enthusiastic approval felt like something I hadn't felt in a long time. Validation. Not just for the work, but for who I was outside of the Whitaker name. Afterward, one board member came up to me and said, "We've been trying to make this happen for years, but the big firms either couldn't stay within budget or didn't care enough about the sustainability side. You made both work." His words were the first full, genuine praise I'd heard since the day my world shifted. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath, waiting for someone to prove I still mattered. That evening, I walked through the construction site. The Northside Community Center was still early, just concrete slabs and plywood frames. But in my mind, I could already see the future building. Solar panels that would double as shade structures. Rainwater systems that would nourish the garden. Reclaimed wood framing the main gathering space. I placed my hand on one of the newly poured walls, still warm from the curing process. Everything starts with a strong foundation. My father used to tell me that. Back then he meant buildings. But it applied to life too. I was laying a new foundation, this time built on integrity, independence, and resilience. For the first time since that coffee shop conversation that broke everything, I felt a quiet sense of hope. Not for the future I once planned, but maybe for the future I actually needed. A future I was building my way, brick by brick. 1 year after that voicemail that unraveled my world, I stood in a hotel ballroom at the Mountain West Sustainable Building Awards. Summit Arc Consulting had been nominated for Innovation and Community-Driven Design for the Northside Community Center. The center had opened 2 months earlier to an overwhelmingly positive response. We'd stayed under budget. We surpassed our energy goals. And more than anything, the space had become exactly what it was meant to be. A real hub for the neighborhood. When they announced the winner, Summit Art Consulting for the Northside Community Center, the applause was overwhelming. I walked to the stage and accepted the glass trophy, my hand steady. I looked across the crowd, not expecting to see my father or brother. And of course they weren't there. Whitaker Sons Build Co. had quietly stepped back from events focused on sustainability. My speech was short. I thanked Rachel Monroe for believing in me when no one else would. I thanked the community board for their trust. And I dedicated the award to everyone out there starting fresh, rebuilding from the ground up when their old world falls apart. After the ceremony, several owners of small and mid-sized firms approached me. Word had spread about what we'd done at Northside, especially about how we pulled it off with limited resources. Soon, my calendar was filled with consultations. Summit Art Consulting was officially thriving. I'd hired 2 junior consultants. I was looking to bring on a project manager. We'd moved out of my apartment and into a proper office, fittingly in a restored warehouse. And I couldn't help but smile at the irony. My father had removed me from a company that carried our name. And I'd built something successful under a name that carried my vision. It was during that time of growth that I began to hear whispers about Whitaker Sons Build Co. Their luxury condo project on what used to be my Riverbend Place site was in trouble. There were cost overruns, construction quality issues, permitting problems tied to environmental standards they'd agreed to during the original approval process. I took no pleasure in their struggles, but I wasn't surprised either. The Whitaker approach had always been to promise big, then figure out how to deliver later, without someone detail-oriented managing operations, without me. Those promises were getting harder to keep. Then came the call I had both dreaded and expected for months. My mother's name lit up my phone late one evening. Lena, your father had a serious health scare. The world seemed to pause, because despite everything he was still my father. Is he? He's stable. They did emergency surgery, but it was serious. Lena. He's asking for you. I sat with that for a long moment. He fired me by voicemail, Mom. He allowed Caleb and Douglas to damage my standing in the industry. He cut me out of the company and the family without so much as a conversation. I know her voice cracked. And I let it happen. I'll never forgive myself for that, but he's still your father. And he might not have much time left. The hospital room was dim when I arrived. My father looked small in the bed, surrounded by wires and machines. My mother was sitting next to him, holding his hand. Caleb wasn't there. When I approached, his eyes opened. Recognition flickered. Then something like shame. Lena, he said softly. You asked for me, I said. He nodded. I did something unforgivable to you. I didn't argue or offer an easy response. Yes. You did. I let fear drive me. Fear of losing control. Fear of the company changing too much. Fear of becoming irrelevant. He coughed and Mom helped him sip water. Douglas played on those fears. He made me believe you were planning to push me out, change everything we'd built. I would never have done that. Everything I tried to implement was to strengthen the company you started. I know that now, he said, looking away. Whitaker Construction is in trouble, Lena. Serious trouble. Without you, we're not the same. Part of me wanted to take in that acknowledgement, that moment of vindication, but it felt hollow. I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. But I have my own company now. I've heard. Summit Art Consulting. You're doing well. A flicker of pride crossed his face. You're doing what I couldn't, evolving. Adapting. We talked for nearly an hour. Not just about the business but about family. About how patterns had repeated across generations. How fear of losing control had cost the Whitaker men the very legacy they were trying to protect. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. He never said the words I'm sorry, and I didn't offer complete forgiveness. But we reached something that felt like mutual understanding, an acknowledgement of what had been lost, and what might still be salvaged, not in business but in family. As I got up to leave, he said, that message I left you, the voicemail, when you only replied, understood. That was the moment I first doubted what I'd done. You didn't beg. You didn't argue. You just accepted it, with more dignity than I showed in delivering it. It wasn't acceptance, I said. It was the only power I had left in that moment to deny you the satisfaction of watching me break. He nodded slowly. You're stronger than any Whitaker before you, Lena. You built something new from nothing. That I only ever followed the path that was already laid. In the months that followed, our family began a slow, cautious healing. Mom and I returned to our weekly lunches. Dad and I spoke now and then, mostly light conversation, both of us gently learning how to navigate this new version of our relationship. Eventually, Caleb apologized after the Klein partnership collapsed and he was left facing the fallout from decisions he hadn't fully understood. Whitaker Sons Buildco survived, but in a reduced form. They sold the Riverbend Place project to a new developer, who, ironically, hired Summit Arc Consulting to consult on how to make it more sustainable. My father stepped down as CEO and took on a limited chairman role. He invited me to return, that I declined. The bridges had burned too completely to cross them safely again. But I did consult occasionally on Whitaker projects, a professional courtesy that gave closure on both sides without reopening old wounds. 2 years after the voicemail that shattered my life, I stood at a new construction site. Groundbreaking for Summit Arc Consulting's first full design-build project. We had partnered with Rachel Monroe's firm to create affordable, sustainable housing for healthcare workers. This project represented everything I believed construction could be: community-focused, environmentally responsible, financially achievable. As I pressed the ceremonial shovel into the soil, I thought again about foundations. How they must be strong, but also flexible enough to withstand shifting ground. How the strongest structures often rise not from patched ruins, but from cleared earth and honest beginnings. That voicemail, the one that nearly destroyed me, also set me free from the burden of inherited expectations, free to stop compromising my values for family peace, free to discover strength I didn't know I had, because the supports I once leaned on were suddenly gone. You're out of the family business, my father had said. Understood. I replied that it wasn't surrender, that it was the start of something new. That word became a promise to myself. My principles, my vision. That it meant I understood not only what I had lost, but what I was ready to build. That I understood my worth was not tied to the Whitaker name. That I understood the most important foundation in life isn't made of concrete or steel, but of integrity, resilience, and the courage to begin again. Now when I look at my team, wearing Summit Arc Consulting hard hats on a site built on our terms, I feel nothing but gratitude, because losing my inherited legacy allowed me to find my authentic path. Being cast out helped me return to myself. And if you've ever had to start over after losing something you thought was permanent, I hope my story gives you hope. Because sometimes our greatest strength only shows up when everything we depended on is gone. And sometimes the most meaningful things we build begin where something else had to end. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment about a time when you had to rebuild from the ground up. And subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience, growth, and starting again. Because sometimes understood isn't the end of the conversation, it's the beginning of an entirely new dialogue with yourself about who you are and what you're truly capable of building.